Hey, what is up guys? So today's video is going to be on the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and some of the big things that might be happening behind the scenes. Now, this past weekend, we learned that the Inhumans movie was pushed back to another date. We don't exactly know when. Now, this, of course, was a great excuse for all the clickbait websites to start a Inhumans canceled, which of course we know they're not. They're just not coming out on their original release date due to other movies being announced for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, such as Spider-Man Homecoming and Ant-Man and the Wasp. And undoubtedly we are going to be getting a Guardians of the Galaxy 3, a Doctor Strange 2, an Ant-Man 3, and a Spider-Man 2, which we do know from leaked documents that came out during the Sony leak has to be out by the end of 2019. And let's face it, Disney knew this was going to happen as they positioned the new indie movie just a couple weeks around Inhumans, and they would not fight their own property. Now, to get to this crazy conspiracy theory I have and I'm going to see start showing up online, we have to go over some history. So of course by now we should all be very well aware that Marvel Studios and Marvel does not own the film rights to the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. Ever since the late 90s, Marvel had to sell off a bunch of properties to just stay afloat as they were going bankrupt numerous times throughout their history. Fox ended up getting the X-Men and Fantastic Four, Lionsgate ended up getting Punisher and Blade, Sony ended up getting a few characters such as Ghost Rider and Spider-Man, but along with that, Fox was also able to snatch up the Daredevil rights. Now this is very important because as the X-Men rights went to Fox, a person who was brand new to the scene and had an extensive knowledge of Marvel named Kevin Feige would be hired by Fox to be the associate producer of the X-Men movie coming out in the year 2000. Now, due to the huge success of the X-Men movie, Kevin Feige would go on to be hired by a person you all might be familiar with called Avi Arad, who at the time was in charge of Marvel Studios. Eventually, he would go on to become the president of Marvel Studios in March of 2007. Now, ever since then, he has had a giant impact in Hollywood that is almost unrivaled by any people out there. When he pitched the idea of the shared universe, most people laughed at him. They did not see this as a viable thing because they thought no one would be willing to sink this much money into properties and that fans would not want to sit through other movies to be able to collectively come together and watch a film like the Avengers. Now, at the same time, while Kevin Feige made his name here at Marvel Studios, the other people he used to work with, such as Avi Arad at Sony and the people at Fox, developed very bad blood between each other because Marvel Studios wanted to reacquire those characters they lost, and they were slowly starting to. They were able to regain characters like the Punisher, Ghost Rider, and Blade after all those franchises bombed at the box office. Now, some of this bad blood also came in the early 2000s when Kevin Feige was actually working close with the X-Men branch, of course, at Fox, and the Sony branch at Spider-Man. He actually almost worked out a deal to have Hugh Jackman appear as Wolverine for a cameo in the Spider-Man movie. It was pulled at last minute by Fox. Now this is where we get to more modern day problems between the two studios. After the failure of the original Daredevil movie starring Ben Affleck, the Daredevil movie literally went nowhere, and there was about a 10-year license gap in which Fox had to start production on a new movie and they had to be shooting. They of course were pitching a hard-edge 80s movie about Daredevil. Now a couple weeks before the license would lapse back to Marvel, Disney, Marvel, and Kevin Feige actually sat down with Fox Studios and tried to hash out a deal so that Fox could hang on to Daredevil if Marvel Studios was allowed to get the rights to Silver Surfer and Galactus back to them. Now at this time, this was still in the early Phase 1 finishing, and obviously the end goal would have been to build up Thanos and then Galactus and Silver Surfer as the ultimate end goal to the MCU. Fox completely rejected this idea and they let Daredevil slide back to Marvel. And this of course led to the creation of the Daredevil TV series on Netflix a couple of years later. But the bad blood was clearly there and now at an all-time high. Now switching over to the Sony side of things for a little bit, we of course saw Kevin Feige was instrumental in helping with all the Spider-Man movies, starting with Spider-Man 2, in which many would consider one of the best comic book movies of all time. Now, when he became the head of Marvel Studios and started producing rival movies, he was much less involved starting with 2006. And of course, any of the tips he gave them pretty much went unheard, which is the reason we ended up getting Spider-Man 3 and inevitably the Amazing Spider-Man reboot. Now this all really came to clash heads when the Amazing Spider-Man 2 was coming, as we saw that he instructed them to please use a whole lot less and make a simpler story and not do the world building thing. They didn't listen and the movie came crashing and burning, and almost signaling the death of the Spider-Man character on film. Now after this happened, fans were very outspoken. We wanted Spider-Man back at Marvel Studios, and this is when Kevin Feige and Disney sat down and hashed out a brand new deal with Sony to bring Spider-Man in a brand new reboot over to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, in which Marvel would oversee the production of the Spider-Man movies while Sony would flip the cost. So after all this animosity and fighting between the studios, Kevin Feige was able to hash out a deal between two of the biggest rivals who previously resented each other. And now all eyes are on Fox. And this is where we get to talking about the Fantastic Four and their failures. Ever since the early 90s, Fox has actually had the license to produce the Fantastic Four movies, starting with the Roger Corman version, going all the way to the mid-2000s version, and inevitably the reboot, which of course came at us in 2015. Now when the details emerged about Marvel trying to reacquire the Fantastic Four, or at least their villains, this is when fans started to be very outspoken, and when the first trailers and pictures and the pitch for the Fantastic Four reboot came out, it was a definite yes. Please give the rights back to Marvel. We do not want this. And of course, once the movie came out, it crashed and burned at the box office, and the reviews were quite brutal, let's be honest. Now, a lot of the bad blood with the Fantastic Four things lies in the sole reason that Fox was only making this reboot and on the cheap to keep the license away from going back to Marvel. They did not want another Daredevil situation, and the movie suffered. And after the bomb that was the Fantastic Four, after its release, Fox has another 7 years to try to decide what to do with the Fantastic Four. So they have till 2022 to get out another movie. And let's be honest, nobody wants another Fox-made Fantastic Four movie. Or if you do, you're in the super minority on this one. Which brings me to the newest point, in which we started the video with after this kind of lengthy history lesson. So the Inhumans movie is delayed. We know this. But why? Let's face it, Disney knew this was going to happen before they ever announced the Indiana Jones movie, like I've said, and they would not just throw the movie out there to suffer, because the Inhumans are going to be the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But clearly they have some other plans that had to shift around once they acquired Spider-Man and decided that all of their movies are more or less going to be giant trilogies. So the Inhumans was moved, and it's probably going to be coming out in some of those unannounced dates we have in 2020 and 2021. But here is where things get really interesting. Me having talked to a few people who, of course, if you guys check Twitter, I've teased some of the stuff coming out with the Amazing Spider-Man and the exact times we would get casting dates, which were all on point. Now, my sources said that there was some development with something big happening at Marvel Studios that they're not ready to talk about yet. Now, I wasn't ready to talk about anything like this up until I saw a few people actually mention something, and then someone else I talked to also mentioned that something was happening. And being on Twitter and seeing a person post about what he's wondering if Marvel acquired the X-Men or anything like that, and if that's what's up in 2019, someone that is actually involved with Marvel replied. And as the question was if the Inhumans were cancelled or the X-Men are going to be in the MCU, she said, neither. What's really going on will blow your mind. Stay tuned. Now, it's very interesting that I've heard from a few people that something was happening, and then someone related to Marvel actually says the same thing. Now, I want to believe as much as anybody, and this is the crazy conspiracy theory, but what if Kevin Feige and Fox Studios have made a deal to bring over the Fantastic Four in the same exact way that they did with Spider-Man? Which then would make a whole lot of sense if you were to take the X-Men franchise and keep them in their own little thing, or whatever the reboot is, and Marvel Studios is able to reacquire some of the things related to the Fantastic Four and start building that up. Maybe the Inhumans was moved out of Phase 3 and into later Phase 4, because the Fantastic Four and Galactus and Norrin Rad would take precedent over this, and as the Inhumans are still a minor thing on Earth and in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the royal family would really not be a big impact to anything unless they come to Earth. Now also, keep in mind, various people involved at the executive level at Marvel and at Fox and the people making these movies have all said they would love to see this happen. And also keep in mind that the Incredible Hulk is in the same exact boat. He is still a property of Universal, but they are lending him out to Marvel Studios to use. So to me, all things point to a possibility that we could be getting some sort of announcement, maybe even this year, about the Fantastic Four being rebooted into the MCU. And honestly, I think this would be quite exciting and will show a willingness that not just Sony is willing to work out a deal, that Fox is also. And if this was to happen, that would mean that the X-Men aren't far behind. And we've heard numerous times from numerous different people that the X-Men might be seeing a drastic overhaul after the success of Deadpool. So why wouldn't they try to reach out and make one ultimate shared universe shared by up to 6 different studios? It's only clear that everybody would benefit in the long run, especially the fans. So there it is, guys. History lesson, some big news there from someone that actually works at Marvel. So if you guys have any ideas on this, comment down below and let me know what you guys think.